Hello, and welcome to today's ePractice Manager webinar regarding why your practice needs an office manager. I think it's important to start out by saying that ePractice Manager, you might know, has another webinar on this topic. It's called the Ideal Office Manager, and it's available on our website. If you're a customer of ours, it's also available in your own training system. The difference is that we have gotten quite a few inquiries about a preceding question. It's nice to know what the office manager position entails, what it's made up of, what it's intended to do. But sometimes doctors are not quite ready, practice owners are not quite ready to hire and use a full-time office manager, and they need to know a little bit about the reasons behind that decision, the timing of it, the importance of it, etc. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have some questions at the end, and we're certainly able to work with you on a more personalized basis on the factors that will be involved with how you make this decision. So we're going to start with some common misconceptions. Oftentimes we ask doctor owners if they have an office manager for a practice, and they say yes, they do. And as we drill down on that concept a little bit more, we find out that it's quite uncommon that a doctor owner has a true office manager in place and functioning for a practice. Sometimes they will say, well, this person has been there the longest, has been here the longest, and so he or she helps out with extra stuff. Sometimes it's the person who runs the front office and in so doing has some access to some of the practice financial information, which then ties into payroll or might have to do with placing an ad when we're looking at hiring someone. So they kind of get the reputation for being a front office person plus, and maybe even the title of an office manager. To the contrary, the office manager position is a fully functioning executive position in a practice. This is true of the largest practices and even of the smallest practices. So how does that break down? The senior executive in a business or in a practice is responsible for everything that happens below that person in every department, with every patient, and with every outcome. If there isn't an office manager, in name only or otherwise, then the doctor, for all intents and purposes, is the office manager. Well, that's interesting, and it can be a huge limiting factor in a practice. So on the doctor side, if you are a doctor and you own a practice and you have those two major hats and functions that you're responsible for, on the doctoring side, that work largely consists of working with one patient at a time, conducting an exam, providing a diagnosis, setting up a treatment plan, and of course, providing the treatment for your patients, which is the whole reason why we're there. It dominates a doctor's time. And whether that person is an associate doctor or a doctor owner, that is the lion's share of how that doctor's time is spent and where that effort is placed. Of course, those who own a practice also have the reality and the full awareness that there are other parts to the business owner side of things. They know they need to get payroll out, and they know that they need to make sure that the building is there and the equipment is there and things are kept up to specs and all of those things. But that owner part can be quite minimized. It can be reduced down to the bare essentials. It can have to do with whatever comes up today, and on a somewhat defensive basis, we are handling the issue of the moment, or the thing that's coming down the pike, or the thing that is getting the most attention in a squeaky wheel type of way. So when we look at it like that, and we're talking about the office manager position, our interest is in being in touch with what's the purpose of having an office manager, whether that hat is held fully or partially by a doctor, fully or partially by another team member. The idea of having an office manager in place is expansion. We are supposed to be looking at the flow of patients into the practice. Thus, there's a marketing component to this through the practice. Thus, there is a staff and protocol aspect that's involved. Having the expansion of the practice named and in mind and also manipulating the environment as we go along from day to day. Things change. Your staff changes, your patients change, regulations change. So it's a matter of making sure that the environment, the staff, the patients, and the plan for expansion and moving forward is under control. That's what an office manager is set to do. Now, a doctor who has a full-time clinical responsibility is probably not going to give all of these parts of the practice due attention. So let's take a look at the next part. What really is involved with the objectives of the office manager position? Well, the office manager is there to take care of the practice first. The doctor is there to take care of the patients first. But if the office manager is treating the practice like his or her patient, the monitoring, the treatment, the improvement, handling any setbacks that take place, they're there to put and keep the practice there first. Sometimes people invert the idea of this with the idea of taking care of the staff first. And that's a nice idea. We do want to take care of the staff. But the way that we take care of the staff is by taking care of the practice first. We have to make sure that it's financially viable and that it's functional so that we can offer jobs and a satisfactory job experience to those who are working in the practice. So we take care of the practice first, then we take care of the staff, and in turn the staff help us to take care of the patients. If we keep that in order, then we know that we can move forward cleanly with the practice. That's how a practice expands. That's how a doctor's time, both in the clinic and as a business owner, on administrative functions gets minimized down to decision making, perhaps some financial input, perhaps some legal input, that kind of thing. But the doctor is largely able to concentrate on delivering quality service to patients. We can keep our staff trained. We can make sure that all of the HR components involved with hiring, onboarding, training, and managing a robust staff and team is involved. And in turn, as we said, you end up with patients who are having the quality of the experience that they should. When you get patients who are being treated well clinically and on a customer service basis, it loops right back around to the beginning, which is that becomes a marketing action. They are ambassadors in your community for the good work that you do. If you are in a general practice, they will oftentimes bring their friends and family members to you. Even in a specialty practice, you will find that you can have referrals to a specialty practice, or your referral base gets so much good news about how the patients are being treated in your practice that they increase their referral activity with you. So that's what we're aiming to do. Of course, we know that all doctors want these things for a practice. It is strictly a matter of whether or not the doctor has enough time to evaluate these points, to pay attention to them on an ongoing basis, to make adjustments along the way, that kind of thing. So let's take a look at the next segment of what's involved here with finding an office manager. We have this chart here for a reason. It's not something that I think you're going to read point by point, but should you want to, by all means, take time to do that. In addition to that, it's available in the ePractice Manager job description. This is here to make a point. These are simply types of work that an office manager is responsible for doing in any given practice. Somebody who can be at the helm as it relates to these issues, these matters, the productivity of these ideas, and to make sure that we are taking the most proactive and the biggest bite out of these subjects for the practice so that we can move forward cleanly. Well, that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of types of work, and that's a lot of things to be good at. So it's difficult for a doctor to be an expert in things like marketing and HR and some of the administrative specifics that are involved with an office manager's work. But if this work isn't done, we can't spin off the proper systems, the proper statistical evaluation, and the like that will lead to stability in a practice, which is ultimately what we're looking for. So what kind of a person can do this type of work? Let's look at some skills, and then we'll look at some characteristics of what an office manager really should be all about. We need to work with someone who is an everyone is responsible for everything kind of person. There is no task too big or too small. There is nothing that you would ask your staff to do that you wouldn't do yourself or have the skill to do. But mostly this work has to do with identifying the type of work and task that comes into play and delegating it appropriately. We don't mean this on just a task level, but we have to construct the practice so that the right people are in the right positions, that they're trained to do the right functions, and therefore the patients flow appropriately from one place to another in the practice. To do that, you have to be somewhat straddling the line of being in the same boat as the staff, but also being squarely on the side of the management of the staff. You buy yourself a lot of credibility when you have clinical and administrative skills that you can lend to staff, especially for oversight and training purposes. But they become very trusting of you when they see the work that you're doing and the outcomes that you're getting on the administrative side. We want someone who can use enough good communication to really get at the heart of the matter with staff. We need someone who is organized enough that when a staff member does report a problem or hits a barrier, that this person can be responsible for the follow through that's required to truly root out and handle a practice problem. A lot of practices do a very good job of handling practice issues. The problem can become consistency. Is anybody watching? We ran into an issue, we came up with a solution for that, we put it into place, and we'll pick that subject back up 3 months later and find that the solution didn't have any longevity or persistence in terms of its use or implementation. So that can become a problem, and we need someone who has a tremendous amount of objectivity to say, well, that was a bad solution in the first place, or that was a solution that needed some oversight and we didn't tend to it enough. Or we can say the staff have simply rejected this solution, and then it's a matter of either training or discipline having to do with that particular issue. One of the biggest tie-ins for the office manager position is the work that is done with the doctor owner of a practice. It is a very isolating activity for a doctor owner to be in charge of the clinic and all of the management, executive, administrative things that are part of running a business. In this sense, two heads are most definitely better than one. We have a lot of diagnostics that we use to tell you what's going on with your practice, but even the idea of how often do you regard those diagnostics? Do you know what they mean? Do you know what those trends are telling you? Do you know what to do based on what you see with the trends that you're experiencing in different parts of your practice? Well, that evaluation process doesn't have to be complicated. It's actually more important that it's done consistently. And when you get two people who are aimed at two different parts of the practice, perhaps manager on the management and administrative side and the doctor on the clinical side, if you put all of that information together along with the statistical management, you're going to find that you will come up with a very easy idea of what's going on and what to do about it. The other thing is, are we establishing goals? It's important for a doctor to not just deal with what's happening in this moment or in the next day or week to come, but to have a bigger picture in mind. When you do that, when you cast your goal out into the future, then everything lines up with that activity. You're able to set up the operating procedures that are going to make progress in various areas of the practice. You're going to eradicate problems that are just about to become a barrier to your growth and your goal. So just the basics of goal setting, the basics of statistical evaluation to see if those goals are being met. Again, when you have an office manager who is elbow deep in the people and the patients and the systems, that person brings something to the table in terms of the evaluation of the goals and how well we're doing moving forward. So what we want to keep in mind here is, where does the need for an office manager become a limiting factor for the practice? People will oftentimes ask us, how can I afford to put a full-time office manager in place for my practice? And that's a highly compensated position, somebody with a particular skill set, and what is that person going to do all day, for example? Well, what we like to do to try and keep this in check and to evaluate that very, very specifically per practice is to find out, is it limiting your growth and is it limiting the productivity of the practice? So by way of example, let's just talk about case presentation and case acceptance in a practice. If you are an ePractice manager, customer, or client, you will know that we have a great tracking system for that. We'll spin off a whole lot of data for you that you can use quite easily. But somebody's got to be paying attention to that information. So are you meeting benchmarks on rate of acceptance? And if you are meeting benchmarks on the rate of acceptance, how do you strengthen those things so that as your volume goes up, you don't deteriorate your case acceptance rate? If you're not meeting your benchmarks, then what are the two true problems at hand? Do we have true financial problems on the part of your patient? Is it an education process? Is it a training issue with your staff? Is it a matter of the patient flow? Somebody needs to be able to observe that and troubleshoot those issues along the way. Well, it gets easier and easier to justify an office manager position and the salary that goes along with it when you're looking at it in light of the fact that you can easily see a 10% increase in your case acceptance rate on the part of your patients if that area is being overseen, if it's being managed, if it's being adjusted along the way, etc. Another example, I guess, that we'll give on that same front has to do with human resources. You do have a human resources department in your practice, whether or not you identify it on an office chart. It is something that you're interacting with every single day. And you do have regulations that change, both on the clinical side of things and on the people side of things in your practice. Well, those regulations changing is something that needs to be monitored by someone. We need to know that an HR law has changed. We need to know that a best practice has changed. And we need to approach the management of our staff with those things in mind. So when you're conducting hiring interviews, are you doing that within the parameters of not only the legalities, but how are you going to screen and find the best people for your team? If that's done in a haphazard way by a doctor who is seeing a prospective team member for 5 minutes at the end of a 10-hour patient day, you're really not applying best practices to that and coming through to the other side on the result that you want. So if you hire and train and lose and replace and hire again and train various staff members for various positions, that takes a tremendous financial toll on the practice, not to mention the frustration that's involved with the team members who have to train that person or the doctor who simply doesn't have the bandwidth to get to the bottom of it and fix the problem. So those are some examples of where instead of a salary costing you money, you are actually costing income for the practice. And at the point where that becomes more and more true every day due to the doctor's lack of participation for very good reason, he or she is doing something else in the practice, then we know that it's time to seriously consider the office manager position. And again, taking care that if we're going to embark upon this type of task, we need to make sure that the office manager position is designed for what it is supposed to be and do and create for the practice, and that we put someone fully into that role. We invest in training them along the line of the different things that they'll be responsible for in the practice, and then we similarly make adjustments along the way. Keeping a practice viable is one of the most important things. Again, we keep attention on making sure that we put the practice there first, that we keep the practice there, and it gives us the ability to employ people and therefore take care of patients. Well, who's addressing the financial viability? What are your cost ratios? Are you maintaining what you should be as it relates to staff and patient relations on a quality control basis? Are your marketing efforts being done in a cost-effective way, and are they driving the patients into your practice? These are all subjects that are very, very difficult for a doctor at the end of patient day or on evenings and weekends when patients aren't being seen to do a full analysis, to really oversee any steps and strategies that are put into place, to then look at the impact of the steps that you've taken and see if they're getting results for you, to make the adjustments that are required, and then to continue to evaluate, delegate, grow, etc. So these are the basics of why, when, how an office manager role should be brought into play in a practice, or perhaps if you have an office manager, we are looking to optimize that for you. and make sure that it becomes closer and closer to an ideal situation with your office management and all of the productivity that can come from that. I'm Wendy Reifer. I'm happy to speak with you about this subject today. I'd like to emphasize a couple of things just one more time. First of all, to find out if there are any questions from any of those of you who have been watching along the way and would like some specific information for your practice. Okay, it looks like we do have a question. And perhaps we're not able to have that person read the question. Okay, I will go ahead and fill in. It looks like the question here has to do with the idea of what if I don't have someone within my existing team who is eligible to become an office manager? Well, it's a great point. We would like to promote from within someone who has that familiarity with your practice, and it's often our inclination to do just that. The problem is that if you do not have someone who is qualified as an executive, if they don't have the aptitude and the discipline and the skill set to successfully carry out the tasks of office management, you may be faced with hiring from without instead of promoting from within. This can be a scary proposition for doctors and for staff as well, to say this person coming from the outside may or may not know us and how we do things. There is a certain point where we're going to have to be okay with that. We're not exactly looking to do things exactly the same way that we've always done them, the pattern that we've always used, the steps that we've always taken. And while we're not looking for broad sweeping change, we are looking for someone who truly has the skills to apply their insight and the follow-up to these different parts of practice development. So ePractice Manager has a very good lineup for onboarding. First of all, we help screen office managers for practices, but onboarding an office manager has to do with a long observation phase. Whether your practice is in fantastic shape or it has tons of challenges, a good solid observation phase on the part of the new office manager is important. And by the way, this is true whether you promote from within or hire from without. Really getting fresh eyes, observing the systems, looking at the staff workflow, finding out where we can assist the doctor in more ways than just the clinic, but on the administrative side as well. That's an important phase. So we have a great training and onboarding lineup for that. As we move forward, what we do is stage the person's stepping into the office manager role so that he or she will assume more and more responsibility as their familiarity with your particular practice situation comes online. So it is a matter that they have their raw skills, their experience, their talents, but they do need to absorb the data of what your practice is there for, what it's doing, how well it's succeeding at that, and then moving forward. So I think that's it for the questions. Again, I'm Wendy Reifer. You will see on the screen my email address and direct contact phone number information. I would be happy to hear from you and to go over the specifics with you of how well you think this position, the office manager, has been addressed in your practice. What kind of work needs to be done to bring you from where you are to where you want to be relative to this position, and what kind of steps and timing might be involved with helping to make that happen. So I appreciate you joining us today. Good to have some time to cover this important subject, and please do refer to the Ideal Office Manager webinar with ePractice Manager for further details about how this important position works and what you can expect from someone that ePractice Manager helps to put into this position for you. Okay, thank you very much.